For the frontline, the manager is the organization. And therefore, the experience that they provide is very, very important. And hence, there are a number of steps that we take, which is training managers how to hire, how should they onboard, what is the hand-holding that is provided to them in the journey of making the employee successful, and then in recognizing them.
Hello and welcome to the People Led Show. I'm your host Tehseen Kazi, and our guest for today is the incredible Dhanashree Thakkar. Dhanashree is the head of human resources at Bharti AXA Life Insurance and has over 2 decades of experience in the field. Dhanashree has experience leading teams at diverse companies like the Future Group, Mahindra and Mahindra, Kotak Life Insurance, and McDonald's India. A postgraduate in organizational psychology, she has also completed her general management from IIM Ahmedabad. Dhanashree defines herself as an observer and a listener, the perfect blend for an empathetic HR leader. Welcome, Dhanashree. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Tehseen, and thank you for inviting me and saying all these nice things about me.
Dhanashree, now I'm going to start off with something that we ask all our HR leaders, and we want to know who is the human behind human resources. What is Dhanashree like outside of work?
Outside of work, I don't think I have a outside work and inside work as a separate personality. I think the closer they are, the more fun that you have. Uh, at both places, I can appear serious, but otherwise, I like having fun, love theater, love art, and generally like having this whole thing that, one day at a time. And one of my critical value is make a difference in people's lives. And that's what attracts me to this profession. That's something which keeps me grounded as a person.
I want to take that as my, a segue to my next question, making a difference in people's lives. And I think that's what your job is all about every day. That's what you're doing, making a difference in people's lives. So, Dhanashree, from that perspective, I wanted to understand what are some challenges that, you are looking to solve in 2024?
I think my challenges would be similar to a lot of HR leaders and a lot of people leaders. First is with all these, different things which go on, how do you ensure that people give their best? And while they give their best, are they also happy, excited, and, continue performing their best? A balance of this can be very critical. It's a difficult balance to have. Second, how do you ensure such people stay back? That we continue giving them the best experience, as well as they continue being excited and stay with us. And third is, how do you get the best people? How do you hire such people? Okay, so in a way, I had heard this in one of the books, which is Get, Keep, and Grow. So that's, I think, a bigger challenge for all the people leaders.
So, Dhanashree, when you say, value creation for people, how do you, as an individual, define value, and how should, because value is so subjective, it can mean different things for different people. How should HR leaders look at creating value for people in the organization?
In one of my previous companies, I'd heard that, your time is like money invested in a stock market. Okay, so the time I give in this organization is my investment. And in this duration of how much ever time that I stay, if my money, like the stock market, continues to grow, then it's value created. So similarly, if my time here, I grow as a person, individual, learn new skill sets, I'm adding to myself and I'm giving back something. I think in a way there can be different definitions of value, but this was simpler for me to understand and very easy to explain to anyone that this is what is value. It can have different connotations which are subjective in nature, and each one may define value differently, like you said, Tehseen. But this was easy. If I tell you, Tehseen, your time here for this podcast or whatever you do, is your money in stock market. And obviously you would want to invest in places which are growing well and have consistency in terms of growth, which continue to grow. And that is how I treat your experience. Does it make it worth your while?
Absolutely. It doesn't make it worth your while. And I think making it worth your while is so different for everybody, right? I don't think there's one single answer or single solution to it. You
There
just
isn't.
keep working and growing towards it. But on that note, Dhanashree, how are employee expectations changing today, especially now with the Gen Z being in the workforce? Are you seeing any significant differences in how employee expectations have changed over the years?
So our average age is between 30 to 35, okay? And so I wouldn't say we are Gen Z. But what I've seen the Gen Z population that we have, it's an interesting, that the expectations in terms of, let's say, my generation, I think the expectation is, hard work is equivalent to, you have to work harder, you have to give your best. Whereas what I've seen of Gen Z is, having priorities much clearer and drawing the lines very clearly. This is my work domain, this is my personal domain. And there is a certain level of equality that I notice, which is different to my generation. Okay. It is different to adapt. And I think people, leaders that I see are trying to adapt and finding it very difficult to even accept that someone can stand up and say that, I'm sorry, this is your priority, it may not be mine.
Wow, I just love how candid you were out there. And, that was the most simplest and most candid way you could have put it in. That the Generation Z, as we call it, they're very clear about their priorities. In fact, we've been having conversations with a lot of HR leaders and we've heard a similar sentiment across. In the interim, are your strategies changing in any way, considering, right now your larger population is between 30 to 35?
I think there is appreciation that we have to function differently with different audiences. But for us, given that it's 30 to 35, I don't think generation gap becomes a big factor in how HR strategies are played. I think it's more about unifying employee experience. That's where our challenges lie.
And if I may ask, when you say unifying employee experience, what would that look like? Or what are the kind of things that would go towards unifying that employee experience?
So we just got certified third time in a row for Great Places to Work. And say, for example, under that umbrella, if I were to say that the way our example of a best work experience is where there's transparency, there's communication, there's uniformity, things which are consistently brought out through our different employee portals, including Amber. Okay, what do people really stand out and say? Now, if I were to pick one of my remotest branch and a new employee joins, or any existing employee, is he experiencing it the same way that I want him to experience? Okay, that's one example of, a collective Bharti AXA experience. Second is we have our values, like most companies would have values, and most often, values stay somewhere on your web portal, or, for example, on our cards, ID cards, or something. But to live those experiencing the values is something which gradually starts becoming a part of your culture. While the statement sounds simple, but the nuances of making it come alive are quite complex, and consistency is the key.
Dhanush, what I wanted to understand from you, and since you're already using Amber, and I've seen, some HR leaders shy away from using listening channels which are confidential, where maybe the employee's name is there, but the feedback is confidential, and they veer more towards anonymity. So, what do you think would be the reason for that? And how do you make that transition from taking anonymous feedback to taking confidential feedback?
I think the best Tezin, what I have seen is a balance of everything. Okay. We have channels, like Amber, where I can give my name and write the feedback, what I'm experiencing. Okay. And then we have other mechanisms, which are annual mechanisms, which act as such. So I think a balance of, and we have almost about 4 or 5 such listening posts, across the organization, besides the HR constant touch point which goes on. Second, These mechanisms lead to trust in whatever that they're saying is heard without judgment. Okay, and they are both correlated, they are interrelated in a way. Because if the employee believes that his feedback is heard, is acted on, it builds credibility into the system. And then, regardless of whichever channel you're asking feedback, you'll get honest feedback, even if their name is asked. Like, I remember, ages ago when we had started with the annual employee satisfaction surveys, which used to run, there was a huge apprehension that, my name will be seen. It took almost 2, 3 cycles for employees to be convinced that, there was no access to the individual names. From there to now, where every touch point, almost every quarter, when employees get a nudge from Amber or our internal NPS mechanisms, they write what they feel.
Wow, 2 to 3 cycles, and you mentioned annual survey, which means 2 to 3 years.
Yes,
That
absolutely.
that is, I think, this trust building, the whole effort and the process is a long one, and I think that's something, that it's a strong takeaway for me. What are some places where you have regularly seen trust being broken, or these are some things we should definitely not do to ensure that trust remains intact?
I think the typical reaction is whenever I remember department head getting, their feedback scores, immediately the reaction is, who said what? Tell me, who could this be? And I think it takes a lot of conversation, feedback, working with managers to say that, and even me, by other managers, okay? Any of us could experience this because that's how we are wired, also, right? I mean, immediately that feedback, which does not make us look good, makes us behave a certain way. It's a defense mechanism. So I think a lot of training, conversation to get to a point that this is not about you only, it's feedback. And this is an employee voicing out that there is something which they are not happy with, and we need to fix it. So I guess it takes some time to come up to that stage. Where trust is broken is exactly these moments where we go on this fact finding mission. And that's why there is a fear that I don't want to give feedback and, it will be found out or things like that. So while I haven't experienced it in the present company, but I've experienced this in the past, and to rebuild it takes a lot of time.
Absolutely, Dhanashree. And I think one point which I really liked, that you mentioned was that it takes a lot of training and a lot of getting used to that the feedback is not about you personally, it is about the process, it's about how we need to do things better. And I think, creating that differentiation is the hardest part. But I want to also, nudge you further on one more point that you mentioned about heard without being judged. First, hearing them and then acting. Do you and your team also acknowledge feedback that comes from employees?
So I think Amber has this feature which is people to meet, which
Yeah.
gets called out. And that is tracked, of course, where any employee has voiced out that I have a problem. And the acknowledging mechanism of, speaking to that employee and then reassuring them, that's one mechanism. Every morning I get alerts from Amber in terms of, this is a synopsis. And whenever I can, I do read through the feedback. And I like the feature where I can just go back and thank the employee. So, I like those smaller mechanisms that the tool offers. Besides this, I think offline, when we do our virtual focus group discussions or when we do town halls at my level or CEO's level, I think what we first tell them is that, uh, as a culture, to have this mechanism of two-way communication is what we first emphasize. Because they're highlighting a reason doesn't mean that everything is going to be fixed immediately. But I guess the ability to dialogue, and that's what helps us, that's what makes, the management team, the leaders accessible, that they can at least come up and talk and, voice out what they feel.
Got it. So one thing, which you mentioned a few times, and I just want to understand. So if I'm not wrong, there are around 3,500 employees at Bharti AXA.
3,800, yeah.
3,800, yes. So it's obviously not possible for you to talk to each one of them and, have these conversations. But do you feel like these FaceTimes with the CEO, town halls with you, they make a difference? They feel like, leadership is there listening to us, understanding us, and hearing our concerns.
Huge difference. In fact, that's almost one of the highlights of our culture, that it makes, I mean, there is communication forums at every level: the CEO, the function head, the regional teams, the leadership team. And besides this, the other listening posts like Amber, we have employee NPS, we have, discussions with HR, which are open houses. So, with all of this, it just makes it very easy that even in a, good day and not so good day, you have someone to reach out to.
Yep. I think, and to add to that, if I were to say, when they know that leadership is listening, employees know that leadership is listening, that kind of adds to the fact that we have somebody to listen to and who has the decision making power.
Yeah, absolutely. The management credibility. And
Yes.
we've had recently a change in shareholding, and in spite of such a ambiguous time, it's interesting that we still got certified as great place to work. Our scores on management credibility, pride, all of them went up. So I guess, communication has a big role to play, and I guess tools like Amber are very, very helpful there.
Absolutely. I want to move on to, once you have listened, how do you prioritize action? Are there any tips or suggestions, recommendations that other HR leaders should follow in terms of action planning?
I would say that first is we pick, so as a guardrail, you look at what will impact employees' lives, if it has a statutory impact, if it has a customer impact, and if it does have, so these are guardrails that you take. Okay, is it ethical, is it customer related, is it employee related, or any stakeholder related? With this lens, when you start evaluating the solutions, that how is it changing life of any of them, and from that mindset, when you start screening suggestions, comments, feedback, and how many pockets is this coming from, where is it coming from, and that becomes a lens in terms of how prioritization is done. Say, for example, Amber has a beautiful dashboard where we get to know what are the key concerns. How we use it is in our policy decisions, in our development objective, in our conversations with function heads of what could be impacting and what can be changed there. In our dialogues with them, we bring these up, that what is the impact that they can make to manage their teams better. Perhaps these are insights that they haven't picked up informally.
I like that. The framework is quite interesting. And definitely having a real time dashboard to track employee feedback definitely helps in the process. Now, I want to, shift gears a little bit and want to understand about manager experience separately in the employee experience bucket. Managers are an important bridge between employees and organizations. So, what are some things you do and recommend others to do as well to make managers more effective?
So, for managers more effective, of course, in different employee cohorts, say, for example, my frontline. For the frontline, the manager is the organization. And therefore, the experience that they provide is very, very important. And hence, there are a number of steps that we take, which is training managers how to hire, how should they onboard, what is the handholding that is provided to them in the journey of making the employee successful, and then in recognizing them. I mean, for example, Amber has, we use this recognition basis, best engagement scores that Amber provides on its dashboard. So all those managers are recognized and they become examples of what is it that I can do on a daily basis.
I think I'm nearing a close, and I want to understand, I want to know from you, Dhanashree, is there any memorable example of employee experience through your years of, working in the field where you saw a certain action creating a drastic impact on the employee experience?
So personally, I'll give you two examples here. Something I've experienced personally and one otherwise. So one is, I would say that, my boss is a very observant person, even if very, very busy. And there was a time where, I was not at my best given certain personal circumstances. And somewhere it reflect, in conversations or whatever, I hadn't mentioned anything. And, immediately after the meeting, in some time, I get a call that what happened? There's something not right about you. I guess, and, these are moments which, touch one because you've not said something and, someone as busy as him picked this up, made sure that spends time with you to understand, listen, and then find a solution. I think these become signature moments which tie the emotional connection with the individual. Okay. I'll I'll build on this by saying across employee life cycle. Okay. I guess whenever significant emotional moments in individuals' lives are met, that's what becomes memorable. So, for example, it can be, and we try and do as much as we can. You got promoted, and I involved your family in the whole celebration. Or we do these CEO awards, and I have goosebumps right now. But in these CEO awards, employees who won it, who are in some small town, their family comes to Bombay and the entire leadership team welcomes them into the ceremony, and the entire leadership team claps for them as they step in. These are huge moments for them. Okay. And that's what they remember. That's what keeps them associated with the brand.
On that note, Dhanashree, I want to ask you one last question. If there's
So,
one piece of advice you could give to people leaders across India, what would it be?
okay, that's a big, that's a very big one. Uh, I think, I'll keep it very simple. I'm sure there are different theories associated with it. Um, Two words. One is when I joined this function, okay, as a trainee, I remember one of my colleague gave me this advice that HR acts as conscience of the organization. And that has always stayed with me because the conscience always tells you what's right, what's wrong. And I use this as a lever whenever I have to give advice or whenever I have to speak everyone. Second is maintain the authenticity. And this is not just HR, it is as a leader, because specifically this function, the more authentic you are, you can be a great partner to the CEO, because that role is, I don't envy that role at all because it's a very difficult role and it's very lonely. The more you are authentic and you want to make a difference, and on top of that, if you act as a partner with the conscience that you have, I guess your relationships run deeper, and that's what makes you a good shoulder to help the CEO to think of what's coming next, and therefore how can you shape it.
Wow, I think that is a very, very different view, from what I have heard so far and across my interviews. And I think that's so true, right? At the topmost level, it's lonely. Working in a way that you create the best support system for that top leadership is something that all budding people in HR leaders should strive for. That's it from my end, Dhanashree. This was an amazing conversation. We covered a lot of ground, right from listening, action planning, challenges. We covered a lot of ground today, and I'm sure our audience is going to love this.
Thank you so much.
For all those listening out there, Dhanashree is on LinkedIn. She's a top career path planning voice on LinkedIn. So if you want to, continue listening to her, getting her advice and insights and learning from her experiences, do follow her on LinkedIn. Thank you
so much. Thank you.